So, good afternoon, everyone. So, as we all know that the month of September, this is the PCOS awareness month. So, there are different programs on different platforms where we are doing these type of academic discussions where we are trying to increase the awareness regarding PCOS. So, today the topic is PCOS and infertility revisited. So coming to the history of PCOS, this was originally described by Stein Leventhal in 1935. It was historically seen as a reproductive disorder which was characterized by oligoamenorrhea, hirsutism, polycystic ovarian morphology. And then they found that when the bilateral wedge resection of these enlarged ovaries was done, there was a therapeutic effect on the females, that it helped them in normalizing the menses, and it also improved the fertility capacity spontaneously of these women. So the disorder then, it was known as the polycystic ovarian disease. But then 30 years ago, it was first reported that women with PCOS, they had other problems, other metabolic problems, they had hyperinsulinemia. And gradually now it has come to be known as basically a disorder of insulin action as well as defect in insulin secretion. So overall, there is increased risk of glucose intolerance. Basically, there is dysfunction of insulin here. So it is not just a disease of the ovary, rather it is a broad spectrum of various things involved here in PCOS other than just being confined as a disease of the ovary. So coming to the epidemiology, it is one of the most common endocrine disorders affecting women of the reproductive age. It is seen in 8 to 11% of reproductive age group women. And this is one of the most common cause of anovulatory infertility. And this anovulatory infertility is present in 70 to 80% in PCOS. And Indians, we are among the highest, we have the highest prevalence rates in the world. That is 35 to 40% in the reproductive age group. Now, PCOD is almost like an epidemic in India with a 40% prevalence, almost like 1 in every 5 women having one or other presentations and manifestations of PCOS. And the complications of PCOS are lot many. It is not confined to any one particular aspect. There are infertility is one of the symptoms, one of the presenting features of PCOD. Other than that, there are lots of obstetrical complications as well, cardiovascular, metabolic, oncologic, as well as the psychological complications. Now, coming to the diagnosis of PCOS, the National Institute of Health in 1990 first, they came up with these particular criteria that the patient, they should have these 2 criteria to diagnose a case as PCOS. That was hyperandrogenism, clinical and or biochemical, and there should be, second point was there should be oligoovulation or chronic anovulation. Then later on, 2003, there was a Rotterdam criteria. Here it was stated that the patient should have 2 of the 3 given criteria, that is oligo or the chronic anovulation, clinical biochemical hyperandrogenism, and third was the polycystic ovarian morphology. So 2 out of the 3 criteria. Then the Androgen Access Society in 2006, they came up with the criteria that the patient should have these 2 criteria, that is hyperandrogenemia again, whether it is clinical or biochemical, and then the second point was oligo anovulation and or polycystic ovaries. Then there was a NIH evidence-based methodology workshop panel on PCOS in 2012. They again endorsed the broader Rotterdam criteria for the diagnosis of PCOD. And then there was the international guideline for PCOS. It was set up in 2018. They also endorsed the Rotterdam criteria. And this international evidence-based guideline for the assessment and management of polycystic ovary syndrome 2018, this was endorsed by the Center for Research Excellence in PCOS, Monash University, ASRM, and ESHRE. Now, as we all know, there are 4 major clinical phenotypes of PCOS mainly, that is A, B, C, and D. the frank PCOS, classic PCOS, ovulatory, and the mild PCOS. So as you can see here, that if by the Rotterdam criteria, all the 4 phenotypes are included if we diagnose a patient as per the Rotterdam criteria. If it is by NIH, only the A and B phenotypes are included. If it is as per the Androgen Access Society, only A, B, and C are included. So Rotterdam criteria includes all the 4 phenotypes. This is again the same thing, showing that the Rotterdam criteria, it includes, it's the most broadest type of the diagnostic criteria where we can include more phenotypes here as per the Rotterdam criteria. Now coming to the etiopathogenesis of PCOS. Lifestyle, these are all coming into play, and there are hormonal changes which are exacerbated by obesity. Then there is a low-grade inflammation. Then there is hyperandrogenism, insulin resistance. Basically, these are the 2 most important things which we see, and the main causative factor for most of the symptoms in PCOS, that is hyperandrogenism and insulin resistance. And it is these 2 things which are ultimately leading to all the clinical features like hirsutism, acne, or the reproductive complications like oligoanovulation, menstrual irregularity, subfertility, and other metabolic complications like metabolic syndrome, impaired glucose tolerance, type 2 diabetes, more chances of cardiovascular complications, and also psychological problems with body image issues, lower self-esteem, depression, anxiety among the affected people. Now, hyperandrogenemia is a very important aspect in PCOS, and what are the reasons for this hyperandrogenemia? Here, as we all know, the center point here is insulin resistance in PCOS. So there is hyperinsulinemia. This increased insulin will cause an increase in the free insulin-like growth factor 1, which increases the adrenal as well as the ovarian androgens. And also the sex hormone binding globulins are reduced because of the increased insulin, and because of the reduced sex hormone binding globulin, the free testosterone levels are increased. And also we know that in PCOS, there is an increase in the GnRH pulse frequency that also causes an elevated LH levels. This again contributes to the hyperandrogenic environment. So this is all about the pathogenesis. Now coming to PCOS in adolescence, it is often these days diagnosed in adolescence. These are some of the risk factors, like there is a family history of PCOS, overweight or low birth weight, exposure to androgens during gestation, precocious puberty, obesity, if there is insulin resistance. So the most important thing, why this importance of diagnosing PCOS in adolescence, because it is these adolescent girls who later on come in the reproductive age with the other complications, further metabolic complications, even with the history like they are not able to conceive, with infertility problems. So it is very important to identify and diagnose PCOS right at the adolescent age, so that some interventions in the form of whether it is lifestyle interventions or pharmacological interventions, whatever, so to some extent we can correct their metabolic disturbances, so that gradually later on in life that they will present with lesser complications. Now coming to the epidemiological link, PCOD, it increases the risk of type 2 diabetes almost by 1600%, and it decreases the risk of GDM. 60% of GDM patients that develop type 2 diabetes. Insulin resistance is present in 65 to 80% of PCOD cases. Now, pathophysiology of PCOS. There is a considerable debate on what exactly constitutes a PCOS. But we all know that here the key biochemical features present in vast majority of women with PCOS, they are insulin resistance and a chronic low-grade inflammation. Now coming to the development of insulin resistance, insulin is primarily responsible for the control of LH levels. And insulin also mediates the production of androgens by the theca cells. And in women with PCOS, they have increased insulin resistance. They have more levels of circulating insulin levels in their body. There is hyperinsulinemia. And again, this insulin resistance is again further increased because of the deficiency of myoinositol. Deficiency of myoinositol is normally seen in patients with PCOS. It further aggravates the insulin resistance. And the insulin signaling, we all know, is damaged in PCOS, and this is again further disrupted by the myoinositol deficiency. So this PCOS is also considered to be a pituitary dysfunction because there is an increase in the frequency and amplitude of the GnRH pulse release, and that is why there is an elevated levels of LH mainly in PCOS, leading to a hyperandrogenic environment in PCOS. And the excessive secretion of LH, it is one of the hallmark of the classic PCOS with all the features of hyperandrogenism, whether it is biochemical or clinical. And LH-FSH ratio more than 2 is also significant if it is seen in obese women. Now there is enhanced ovarian androgen production in PCOS because of the abnormal LH influence on the theca cells to produce the androgens. And also these ovarian theca cells of the women with PCOS, they have elevated CYP17 gene expression. So you can see this is the granulosa and the theca cells. The theca cells, mainly they are under the influence mainly of the LH, and you can see that the CYP17, these are the genes, they are expressed more in women with PCOS, and this CYP17 gene, they encode for cytochrome P450, and that is important for the precursors of androgens. We can see like pregnenolone to conversion to 17 pregnenolone to DHEA, and all these things we need. There is the requirement for this CYP17 gene which encodes cytochrome P450. So this is increased in women with PCOS. Now coming to the clinical features, there are gynecological features, the complications like there is irregular menstruation, there is infertility, metabolic complications, and androgenic complications like alopecia, hirsutism, and acne. Now here in this slide, we are basically mainly concentrating on not all the metabolic aspects of PCOS, but mainly PCOS with particular reference to the one complication or the one problem which is associated with PCOS, that is mainly infertility. So the first line of treatment is definitely improvement in the lifestyle. There should be lifestyle modifications that is to be counseled and properly explained to the patient. In obese patients, weight loss, changes in the diet and physical activity is recommended. Weight loss, it decreases the serum insulin androgen levels and also reduces the risk of glucose intolerance and type 2 diabetes. Then pharmacological interventions can also be done if there is insulin resistance, glucose intolerance, and or if there is dyslipidemia, then also accordingly pharmacological interventions can be done for that. Now the second line of treatment is ovulation induction. Here the first line of ovulation induction drugs are letrozole and clomiphene, which can be used, and the second line of drugs can be gonadotropins, and also the surgical treatment of laparoscopic ovarian drilling can also be done. And in the third line of treatment, ART can be considered. By doing all this, actually, we are treating basically the symptoms and not the root cause of this PCOS. There are like all the hormonal imbalance, metabolic imbalance, causing all the plethora of symptoms in PCOS. Now, what are the current armamentarium that we have with us to treat PCOS? That is mainly the insulin sensitizers like metformin. We have anti-androgens. We use OC pills, combined OC pills. We use ovulation inducing agents. There are cosmetic treatments for hyperandrogenism, for obesity, and there are other treatments, surgical like laparoscopic ovarian drilling. So these are all the current different methods of treatment which we do for PCOS. Now, when you want to treat anovulatory infertility, if it is a medical treatment, that is ovulation induction, and the first line of ovulation induction is letrozole, then or clomiphene, and the second line intervention are the gonadotropins. And also there are evidences which confirm the efficacy of inositol in restoring the fertility in PCOD patients. And surgically, ovarian drilling can be done, followed by ovarian drilling, then other therapies, like you can then go for ovulation induction with clomiphene, with or without metformin, and that seems to help. Now, what are the different fertility treatment options in PCOS? That is the same thing like we discussed here. This is the evidence evidence summaries and recommendations from the international evidence-based guideline for the assessment and management of the polycystic ovary syndrome. This is an algorithm which is used for the assessment and treatment. As per this algorithm, what they say is that the first line should be a non-pharmacological first line, and that is for infertility treatment, that is the lifestyle interventions. Then comes the first line pharmacological management, and in that comes letrozole, then clomiphene plus metformin or plain metformin or gonadotropins. And after the first line comes the second line pharmacological, which is gonadotropins or laparoscopic ovarian drilling. And then the third line of management, it could be the other interventions which can include ART, that is IVF-ICSI. So this is just, if that was not clearly visible. So the first line should be a non-pharmacological lifestyle. First line pharmacological are the various drugs which are available. And the second line gonadotropins and laparoscopic drilling. Third line IVF. So letrozole should be considered as a first line pharmacological treatment for ovulation induction. There are various studies also which has shown that letrozole seems to give a better clinical pregnancy rates and live birth rates compared to clomiphene. So compared to clomiphene, it should be letrozole, which should be considered the first line ovulation inducing agent. This was a study which was done by A. Jalika et al. In 2016, which was showing a comparison between clomiphene plus metformin, letrozole plus metformin in an IUI cycle, and they have found that letrozole plus metformin was giving a better clinical pregnancy rates compared to clomiphene and metformin. And even if it is not without metformin, there was another study, Legro et al. In 2014, which compared the patients getting metformin, patients with, they compared the patients for ovulation induction using clomiphene with letrozole. And here also they found that the patients who were on letrozole, this was not for an IUI cycle, this was for a natural timed intercourse. And here also they found that the patients who were on letrozole had better clinical pregnancy rates. Now, gonadotropins, they are the second line of treatment for ovulation induction, and it can be also used in clomiphene resistant cases. Gonadotropins also, when we are using, we can add them with some insulin sensitizing agents like metformin. Then laparoscopic ovarian surgery, it is another option which can be used. For weight management in excess very obese patients, bariatric surgery, it can be an option for management of the weight. Now, if you are going for IVF, like what are the recommendations regarding the oral ovulation induction agent? We have discussed that it should be letrozole, which should be the first line of management. And if we are going for other IVF, other procedures, higher procedures like ART, then what are the recommendations? Mainly, it is GnRH. The ANTAC protocol is preferred over the agonist protocol. The advantages are it reduces the duration of stimulation. There is decreased requirement of dose. Overall, the cost is reduced. There is decreased risk for OHSs, and you can give a trigger with a GnRH agonist, and there is an option to freeze the embryos. Rather, freezing of embryos should be considered so that the risk for OHSs is reduced. Now, coming to next thing, that is what is the gonadotropin that we should use, whether we should use HMG or whether we should use recombinant. See, initially there were discussions, lots of discussion going on regarding the use, regarding the benefits of using recombinant FSH in PCOD cases, because the HMG has both the LH as well as the FSH. So there is because already in PCOS there is increased LH levels, and because of which there is a hyperandrogenic environment. So there was reservations regarding the use of HMG, but then there are a lot of studies they have come up which have compared the results between the use of recombinant FSH and HMG for ovarian stimulation in IVF in PCOS patients, and they have almost found that there is not much difference in using HMG compared with recombinant FSH. Rather, it has got certain advantages. That is, HMG has got certain advantages like the cost factor is reduced and risk for OHSS is comparatively less. This was one recent study, G et al. 2020. This was mainly for the poor ovarian reserve patients. They were compared HMG and recombinant FSH, and they have found that the HMG group, they had higher serum, the IGF-1 levels and the lower IGF binding protein levels on the day of oocyte retrieval before the pickup. So when the follicular fluid insulin-like growth factor 1 levels were high, that they found that it was associated with higher fertilization rates, cleavage rates. They got higher grade embryos, there was higher implantation rates and higher clinical pregnancy rates. Another study in 2013, here this was with the long protocol. Here also they compared the HMG with the recombinant FSH, and they found that there is no difference. Rather, both had the same clinical pregnancy rates. But then when they compared, HMG had other benefits. Like there was the lower overall cost, less chance of OHSS, less need for coasting. So these were the other benefits of HMG. So it is basically up to the discretion of the clinicians. They can use either. Now, improving the chances in PCOS. How to, like, contraception is needed. If pregnancy is not desired, then contraceptions in the form of pills. The family planning issues has to be discussed with the doctor, and a proper lifestyle intervention so as to have a proper healthy weight should be considered. Now, does inositol has any role in PCOS? Now, what is inositol? It mediates the cell signal transduction in response to a variety of hormones, neurotransmitters, and growth factors. It is involved in insulin cellular signaling. There are 9 different stereoisomer forms. The most common is the myoinositol, and then that is followed by the D-chiroinositol. And this myoinositol is synthesized from glucose 6-phosphate. So this inositol, phosphatidyl inositol, and their mono and the polyphosphates, all of these, they act as second messengers in a number of intracellular signal transduction pathways. As you can see here, myoinositol is converted to phosphatidyl inositol in the presence of phosphatidyl inositol synthase. And this myoinositol is also converted to D-chiroinositol in the presence of epimerase enzyme. And the myoinositol is the one which mainly regulates the cellular glucose uptake and also the FSH level signaling. DCI, that is a D-chiroinositol, it is mainly involved with regulation of the cellular glycogen storage, and it affects the insulin-mediated ovarian androgen levels. So as you can see here in this picture, it's a inositol insulin signaling pathway. The insulin receptor, it has 2 subunits. There is an alpha subunit, the green color, and the beta subunit is the yellow one. And the alpha subunit and some portions of the beta subunit, they remain extracellular. That is the extracellular domain of the insulin receptor. Once insulin gets attached to this receptor, the insulin receptor substrates, they are activated. And once these insulin receptor substrates, they are activated, it leads to a chain of events which will cause phosphorylation of the phosphatidyl inositol, leading to protein kinase B activation. And ultimately, it is the protein kinase B activation which is responsible for most of the metabolic actions of insulin. So this myoinositol, what is the benefit of giving myoinositol? Myoinositol, it increases the insulin sensitivity. How? By making more of phosphatidyl inositol available in the cells. So myoinositol, normally in PCOS, we see that there is a deficiency of myoinositol and D-chiroinositol compared to normal subjects. So when you're giving this myoinositol to PCOS patients, we see there are a lot of improvements that we are able to see. That is, that it normalizes the insulin signaling, the glucose metabolism is better, The inflammation of the ovarian theca cells, it come down, the androgen levels come back to normal, insulin levels come back to normal, LH level come back to normal. There is gradual resumption of normal menstrual cycles, weight loss begins, spontaneous resumption of fertility is also sometimes happening spontaneously. Otherwise, we can give ovulation induction agents. So the use of myoinositol and D-chiro-inositol in the Indian patient data in PCOS. This was a paper which was presented at ISAR. It was a study, 3-month. It was done on a set of 50 patients. Daily they were given this 2 gram of myoinositol plus 50 milligram. It was given twice a day, and this is the result. The conclusion was that myoinositol showed good improvement in the hormonal parameters, and the patients who were on myoinositol, the clinical pregnancy rates after 3 months were better, but there are more studies are required for this. Myoinositol, it reduces the fasting insulin in PCOS. It reduces the HOMA index in PCOS. It reduces the androgens level, so it reduces the testosterone level in PCOS. The androstenedione level is also reduced. Inositol, it gives a better live birth rate in PCOS. And also there is benefit of using inositol as a pre-treatment to IVF, because using inositol as a pre-treatment to IVF has also been shown to improve the results in terms of clinical pregnancy rates, implantation rates, clinical pregnancy, as well as the live birth rates. So it also favors the live birth rates in ovulation induction. When you are giving along with some ovulation induction agents, adding myoinositol to it improves the live birth rates. It also favors, there was a study which was done to compare inositol and metformin, and they found that using inositol gave a better clinical pregnancy rates compared to metformin. So to conclude, PCOS, it is a multifaceted condition. It is a multidisciplinary approach for subfertility and ovulation needs to be done. Holistic care to increase the success rates of fertility treatment. Most important is the lifestyle modifications like diet, exercise, behavioral therapy. They are the principal treatments. It needs to be properly counseled and explained to the patient. Letrozole and low-dose gonadotropins can be used as first-line agents where affordability and accessibility, they are not issues. Then where the previous interventions have failed, in those cases, we can go for IVF or ICSI, or in cases where there are associated tubal factors or male factors. And giving myoinositol in PCOS cases has definitely been shown to reduce the insulin levels, the glucose levels, the HOMA index, and also it has decreased the other deranged hormone parameters like high FSH or the high androgen levels. It helps to make them come back to normal. And also myoinositol is able to induce normal menstrual cycles. It improves the pregnancy rates compared to metformin. And also myoinositol is effective in ovarian stimulation protocols in PCOS, whether we are doing ovulation induction for IUI or natural cycles, or whether we are doing a controlled ovarian stimulation with gonadotropins in IVF cycles. Addition of myoinositol has been shown to improve the pregnancy rates as well as the live birth rates. So with that, I come to the end. Thank you all. We all, as clinicians, this is our wish to our patients, so that they always have a safe and successful journey through PCOS. Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for that presentation and data. And we sincerely appreciate your data and the management practices of PCOS. After your talk, we will have a question and answer session.
Okay.
So the first question is for myoinositol only. Dr. Premlata Krishna Kumar had asked, what are the side effects of myoinositol? So I will take this question. Per se, the recommended dose is 4 grams per day, and even thrice of day, that is 12 grams of day per day, has also been given to the patient, and no side effects were noticed in this patient population.
Yeah.
Slightly, patient can have a little bit of nausea, or in some cases diarrhea has been noticed. But apart from that, there are no any serious kind of complications or side effects noticed with myoinositol. So that's the information.
And I think that is a good advantage over metformin, because metformin is associated with more GI side effects.
Right. Yes. Uh, Ma'am, the question is there the how long we continue myoinositol? So yes, minimum 3 months. So 3 to 6 months of treatment is recommended.
Yeah.
So that's the next question. The next question is from the possibility of patient going to hypoglycemia after using metformin, and how to manage that in PCOS patient.
In PCOS patients, the patients who are euglycemic, see, not all cases are hyperglycemic.
Yes.
So the PCOS patients who are normoglycemic, they normally with metformin, they don't go into hypoglycemia. But the patients on PCOS who are like, they already have developed this impaired glucose, their glucose is already impaired, that is they have diabetes. In those cases, yes, taking metformin, it should be properly monitored with the consultation of the doctor, because in those cases definitely there is risk for going into hypoglycemia if it is not properly monitored with your blood sugar levels. It has to be properly managed. But
Yes,
otherwise, euglycemic patients on metformin in PCOS cases, they won't go into hypoglycemia by taking metformin. No.
right. So the next question is, what could be the dose and how long to be used, and about the monitoring as well, about metformin.
How long to be?
How long to be used metformin, the monitoring of the patient, and dose of metformin in PCOS patient.
Metformin, for insulin resistance, if we are giving metformin, the recommendation is to give at least 1500 milligram at least a day. But normally, I think what we practically see is that a lot many people, they give, metformin 500 milligram OD to PCOS patients, who have insulin resistance. But giving 500 milligram a day is not enough. The recommendation is to at least give 1500 milligrams. So it should be at least 500 if they are taking. It should be at least 3 tablets of 500. So at least 1500 milligram has to be taken. And it is again like myoinositol regarding the duration. It has to be taken. There is no particular fixed time frame. At least it should be taken for starting from a minimum of 3 to 6 months. It has to be taken. And when you are treating them for infertility, then you can add it along with the other ovulation inducing agents, or if you are taking the patient for IVF, you can add it along with the gonadotrophins. But otherwise, and once they are conceiving also, there is no recommendation now to stop it immediately. Rather, you can continue the metformin. Here, normally the recommendation is at least for the first trimester, you can continue till the first trimester. Following that, it has to be, it depends. If the patient is euglycemic, there is no need to continue metformin after the first trimester.
Right, ma'am. There is a comment from Dr. Nivedita Datta that with metformin, hypoglycemia is not noticed. So even she has commented the same about metformin and hypoglycemia.
Yeah, with euglycemic patients won't go into hypoglycemia with metformin.
The next question is about metformin and severe myalgia. So your comment on that.
Metformin, pardon?
Metformin and myalgia.
Myalgia.
Yeah.
Actually, truly speaking, in my clinical practice, I have not come across any patients who have complained of myalgia following metformin. It can be a complication, but it's not practically seen that commonly. The common complication that the adverse effect that the patient usually complains of is the GI intolerance.
Thank you. The next question is, can we start metformin in adolescent PCOS patients? The role of metformin in adolescent PCOS.
Yeah, that is what actually in adolescence we can start metformin. First of all, when a girl comes to us in the adolescent age group, the most important thing is first to identify whether she is a PCOS or not. And if she sees PCOS cases, first line therapy should be the non-pharmacological, as in the presentation it has been shown. The first therapy, and particularly in adolescent girl, it should be a non-pharmacological interventions like lifestyle modification. If she is obese, then proper healthy lifestyle exercises and to help which will help her reduce her weight, that should be mainly advised, and motivate the patient should be counseled and motivated for that. But in case that is not helping her, and it is seen that she has insulin resistance, because even at the adolescent age you can detect insulin resistance in them. If that is found, then there is no harm in giving metformin even in the adolescent age group, because that will help gradually. Later on, the metabolic complications which they can develop later on will be reduced to a large extent, so it will help. If there is insulin resistance and other features of insulin resistance, giving metformin from the adolescent age really helps.
The next question is from Dr. Nivedita Datta. It is about hyperhomocysteinemia with prolonged metformin usage, and how long is, how to consider it is prolonged.
Metformin.
Yes.
That is what I said. See, metformin, this is not something which has to be taken lifelong. So whenever the patient, you're giving them metformin, first in PCOS, one of the most important part of treatment is counseling and counseling and counseling the patient for the lifestyle modifications. That will help in bringing this all their weight to if most of the patients are obese. So if you're talking about lean PCOS, in those cases definitely lifestyle interventions are not much required. Then that is the difficult cases actually to treat. How are we going to actually explain them, and what is the things that we are going to give them? In those cases, yes, metformin. But if there is insulin resistance but the patient is not obese, in those cases we have to depend upon these pharmacological therapies like metformin or myo-inositol. But yes, we cannot give them lifelong, but definitely in our practice we are giving them for a period of like 2 years, 3 years. That is enough. And then again, if they have infertility from the adolescent age, if they are coming and you are giving them metformin, you can give them for 2 years, 3 years, and gradually if they are obese and if they are able to improve their body weight and all, you can stop the metformin for some time. And then all their lipid profiles and their glucose levels, everything has to be monitored. And if the things are all normal, you can stop metformin for a few days, few months, and again you can gradually restart. So this is because there is no particular time frame that you can give it for 1 year, 2 years, stop it, because PCOS is a problem. It's not going to go away in 1 or 2 years. The metabolic after effects of PCOS, they are going to remain unless and until the patient is taking some serious lifestyle interventions, modifications. These PCOS metabolic effects will stay. So it is not that we give it for 1 year, 2 year metformin and then the patient is cured of PCOS or the metabolic after effects. No.
Right, ma'am. Absolutely correct. Ma'am, since we also discussing about the adolescent PCOS, as far as diagnosis of adolescent PCOS is concerned, are there any recommendations from your side?
Adolescent PCOS is a recent, that is the 2018, the latest, the guidelines for PCOS. Even they recommend that it is very difficult. In fact, even their recommendation is that it is a very tricky thing, and it is very difficult to diagnose PCOS in the adolescent age group.
Yes.
Because if you're doing an ultrasound on the ovary, you can see a polycystic ovarian morphology as such may be seen in the adolescent age group. So that may not be actually a PCOS case. It may be a polycystic like ovary would appear on an ultrasound finding imaging, but the patients may not be actually cases of PCOS. So how to diagnose PCOS? What they are saying is that just by looking at the symptoms, suppose a adolescent girl, a mother brings her daughter to you, and the main complaints are the girl is getting her a delayed menstruation, like she's getting her menstruation once in every 3 months, once in every 4 months. So it is a delayed menstruation. Along with that, she has severe acne, there is a severe hirsutism. So these are all features of hyperandrogenism and chronic anovulation or oligoovulation, that is delayed cycle. So if these symptoms are there, then they are saying treat her as a case of PCOS. So you can give something for for regularizing her period. Combined OC pills is rather the uh, first line the recommendation for adolescent girls for correcting PC. It's not for correcting PCOS, rather to correct the menstrual cycles. The main concern that they have during that age is to correct the menstrual cycle. So that is the recommendation. So regarding diagnosis, it is not a ultrasound diagnosis basically, but the diagnosis is mainly by looking at by what they're presenting with, what their chief complaints are. If it is delayed menstruation with the features of hyperandrogenism like hirsutism and all, treat it as PCOS.
Right, ma'am. Thank you very much. The next question is from Dr. Sabita Banala. The question is about step-up protocol of letrozole. Step-up protocol of letrozole.
There are so many, like even in letrozole, you have some 8 to 10 protocols in letrozole. There are so many different protocols, but the most commonly used protocol is the regular protocol of letrozole, where you are giving letrozole starting from either the second or third day of the menstrual cycle and give it for 5 days. And usually the recommended dose is giving 5 milligram a day. And the next most commonly used protocol is rather the extended protocol of letrozole. That is, you are giving the patient, suppose you are giving the patient from third day of menstrual cycle, give it for 5 days. And that is, so till 7th day she's taking. So again, 8th day, suppose she's coming to you and you are doing a follicular scan and you are seeing that the follicles have not sufficiently developed, then you can just extend the letrozole for another 5 days, giving the same dose, that is the 5 milligram per day. Just extend it for another 5 days. This is the extended letrozole protocol, which is instead of 5, it is given for 10 days. Then there is the what the doctor has just suggested, that is the step up protocol. That is again like you are giving 5 milligram a day for this cycle, and then you are giving it, calling the patient for the first follicular scan. Not always it is on 8th day, sometimes the patient comes for the first follicular scan on the 11th or 12th day and you are seeing there is no follicle. Again you can give a letrozole for another 5 days. That is, even after a gap of 2-3 days, again you start letrozole for another 5 days. But truly speaking, there are studies which have shown that increasing the dose of letrozole is not going to help. Like in clomiphene, you are giving 50, then it's not working, you go in the next cycle to 100, then in the next cycle you go to 150 milligram per day. But in letrozole, the recommended dose is 5 milligram. So give the 5 milligram dose itself, but give it either for 5 days or give it for a extended period, or after 5 days give a few days of gap and again give another 5 days. Doesn't make much sense or difference by increasing the dose of letrozole.
Right, ma'am. Thank you. So 5 milligram per day, I mean, that should be the ideal dosage. Yes.
Yeah.
The next question is regarding the patient who is pregnant. The patient is on metformin. So what is the role of GTT in second trimester onwards?
The patient is pregnant? Pardon.
Pregnant on metformin,
Okay.
And the role of GTT.
She is diabetic?
Yes, she is on metformin too.
Like
she
metformin, whether she is diabetic and on metformin, or whether she was like PCOS and just she was on metformin pre-conception, so she just continued it in the first trimester.
I will take it as PCOS, pregnant, metformin,
okay.
And the role of GTT.
Okay. So like if she's not a case of diabetes, then glucose GTT you said, because as the protocol in any like cases for the diabetic screening in India, it has to be done right from the, it is not like you wait till the second trimester.
Correct.
The recommendation in India is, first initially it was like do a GCT at around 16, 14, 16 weeks, and then if it is abnormal, if the values are like more than 130, then you go for a GTT. But now it is no longer like 14 or 16 weeks. Now it is then gradually it was shifted to do the first screening for glucose at 12 weeks in the first trimester. But now it is like in the first visit you do the screening for diabetes. So the patient comes to you in pregnancy, whether it is 6 weeks, 8 weeks, do the first screening there and then itself, in the first visit itself.
Right, ma'am. So any role of glucose tolerance test?
Yeah, because when you're doing the screening in India, when you're doing the screening, first is the you do no need to do a fasting. You just give glucose, loading glucose, and then followed by that you do the blood levels. But gradually, if it is abnormal, the glucose levels are abnormal, then it has to be followed up gradually in the subsequent trimesters doing this GTT and the other tests. So it is required gradually later on. But the
Okay.
first screening has to be done before the second trimester.
Right, ma'am. So next question is the best OCPs as far as PCOS is concerned. Type of OCPs,
See,
OC pills.
yeah, OC pills again. There are different types of OC pills. One is the normal combined OC pills containing both estrogen, progesterone, and then we have the another pills, combined pills where where there is the anti-androgens are there, like the cyproterone acetate containing pills. So they work more for cases where there are features of hyperandrogenism like hirsutism, acne, hair loss, rough skin, in those cases. So basically, sometimes there are people who say that because in PCOS, as we have gone through this presentation, the different slides, that in PCOS as such, there is a hyperandrogenic environment. The patient may or may not present with clinical or biochemical hyperandrogenism, but there is a subtle hyperandrogenic environment in PCOS. So giving a OC pill containing a anti-androgen is better in PCOS compared to giving a regular OC pill. That is the thought for many doctors even. But truly speaking, the recommendation is not what the recommendation says, to give the combined regular OC pills as the first line pill, and not the androgen containing pill, the anti-androgen containing pill. They say to give the anti-androgen containing pills only if the patient has externally clinically visible features of hyperandrogenism, like hirsutism, severe acne, or anything like that. Then you go for the anti-androgen containing pills. Otherwise you can go for the regular estrogen progesterone containing combined pills. That is the recommendation.
Right, ma'am. Thank you. Ma'am, there is a repeat question regarding PCOS patient. She is already completed first trimester, and now second trimester onwards. How we going to control the glycemic, or rather the glycemic control? How to work upon that? So that's the question.
How to work upon that?
Yeah, about the glycemic control. Your information about the glycemic control.
So it has to be regularly, like normally the antenatal checkups is done normally like once a month. But in the patients who are diabetic,
Mhm.
suppose the patient is diabetic, then definitely it won't be like once a month. It has to be done at least once in 2 weeks. She has to be called, regular, lead the glycemic, the glucose levels, the fasting, the 2 hour ppbs levels. She has to given a complete chart regarding a pre-breakfast, breakfast, that there is a sliding glucose sliding scale, measurement of the glucose levels in throughout a day. So if she's just on oral hypoglycemic agents, then it is better to just call her once in 2 weeks and just look for her fasting 2 hour ppbs and adjust the um, oral tablets accordingly. But if the patient is diabetic and on insulin, then she needs more intense monitoring.
Mhm. Yes, ma'am. So next question is about prolactin levels and PCOS, and your take on this prolactin level and PCOS.
In PCOS, sometimes there is like a higher prolactin levels seen, but not all cases of PCOS you will see high prolactin levels. In some cases, yes, there is associated hyperprolactinemia in these patients, and you treat the high prolactin levels the same way as you would treat otherwise a normal case where you are seeing a high prolactin level by giving them some medications like bromocriptine or cabergoline or something like that, but usually prolactin levels are not always high in PCOS.
Yes, ma'am. The question was again role of cabergoline, which you have already mentioned. So I
Yeah,
will not.
that is
Yeah,
that is no need to give cabergoline to PCOS patients as such. Only if there is hyperprolactinemia in these PCOS patients, in those cases, cabergoline can be given.
right, ma'am. Ma'am, is there cutoff value for prolactin for the treatment? Because that's the question
Normally, the
I meant.
cutoff values, as such, most of the labs there are some
Yes.
few variations in the range which each lab gives, but usually the regular, most of the standard labs they have a cutoff of like 30, which is considered to be normal. That it should be below 30.
Correct, ma'am. Thank you. Ma'am, I don't see any more questions. I will wait for, yes,
Okay.
there is one more. Again, the question is same. How long does OC pills to be continued in PCOS patients? Like stop, start, something like that. I mean, how to manage OC pills in
Yeah,
PCOS?
yeah. OC pills in PCOS. This is all again like metformin,
Yes.
because as I said, PCOS is not a one particular problem. It is just it's just a cluster of metabolic abnormalities and derangements. So you treat the patient. Basically, the pharmacological interventions are done. Uh, Depending upon what is the complaint of the patient. If the patient comes to you with fertility problems, then you give them accordingly. You won't give her ocpil. If the patient has come to you for a fertility, for that she has come with a complaint that she is unable to conceive, she want to have a pregnancy, then our management, pharmacological management, would be to give her ovulation inducing either oral drugs, or you can give her gonadotropins, whatever, according to her condition. Then suppose the patient is coming to you with just menstrual irregularities, and then you can give her OC pills in those cases where there is no hyperandrogenic features like hirsutism. Then a regular OC pill can be given to her. But again, these OC pills, you give her for a period of, like you say, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, 8 months. So the patient usually will, this is a typical pattern which the patient complains that so long as she's taking the pill, she's getting correct periods, the very regular menstrual cycles, and the moment she stops the pill, her cycles were as irregular as they were before.
Yes.
So before giving even any OC pills, the proper counseling of the patient is very important. Lifestyle modifications which are to be done, it has to be properly, the patient has to be motivated, and the importance of these lifestyle interventions over pharmacological management has to be convinced to the patient that these are going to be actually of long term benefit if you are doing some lifestyle intervention. Because OC pills you can give her for a period of 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, you can give 1 year, you can give 2 year. There are OC pills which we can constantly continuously give a patient without any break. Low dose OC pills you can give her even for 3 years, but after 3 years you can take a small break of few months, just leave it
Hmm.
off, and then again you give. But so long as she does not want a pregnancy and she's just concerned to get a regular menstrual cycle, you can give her OC pills as long as we want. But otherwise, so basically it is like you have to treat the patient as per her requirement. What are her metabolic derangement, what is the main complaint which she's basically anxious about, what is her requirement, whether she wants a pregnancy, whether she wants a normal menstrual cycle, whether her cosmetic concern of hirsutism is a prime concern. You have to see all these things and then accordingly treat.
Right, ma'am. Thank you. Ma'am, the question is in the particular patient, she has her family completed, and can we use metformin for weight reduction in PCOS patient?
Metformin, myoinositol, these are all drugs which help in reducing the insulin resistance, thereby reducing the insulin levels, thereby causing weight loss as well. So these can be tried, but these are not, but because we also come across patients who come and say that when we prescribe them metformin in PCOS, then they think that, okay, you have given us PCOS, metformin for PCOS. So this is like, a magic pill, which we are going to pop in and then we are going to lose our weight. So properly the patient has to be counseled that giving metformin is basically not actually reducing your weight as such. It is actually improving your some of the metabolic derangements, because of which it is helping in reducing a weight to a little extent. But that does not mean that taking metformin is going to reduce your weight.
Right.
Lifestyle interventions are the most important thing which has to be done along with whether it is myo-inositol or metformin.
Right, ma'am. So probably for the weight reduction itself, I mean, that's the goal, then probably metformin is not the right choice. I mean, that is what my
These
understanding
are
is.
not, that is the reason these are not considered as weight reduction pills.
Correct,
No,
correct, correct,
metformin or myo-inositol, they are just helping in reducing the insulin levels.
right.
Thereby, weight is reduced to some
Yes,
extent, but they are
yes,
not weight reducing pills.
correct, correct, ma'am. Ma'am, the next question is, this is a PCOS patient who started taking metformin. Then she conceived and she continued metformin in the first trimester. So what is to be done in the second trimester? Should we stop? Should we continue? What is the decision?
There is no, truly speaking, there is no fixed consensus so far regarding like how long to take the, because initially it was thought that as soon as the patient used to, like, some 10-15 years back, it was like as soon as the patient conceives, stop metformin.
Yes.
Once they come to know the patient is pregnant, the advice was to stop. And gradually they are saying now that you can continue it, and you can continue it till completing the first trimester. And after the first trimester, there is no need to take, actually. They have seen that there is not much benefit in continuing metformin. Neither is there any harm in taking, but already she would be on other medications like iron, calcium, proteins, multivitamins.
Mhm.
So again, adding another drug which will cause more of GI intolerance when it is not giving any benefit, there is no need.
Right, ma'am. So I think that was the answer to mom's question. Uh, I don't see any other questions. I mean, there are comments that your presentation was very good. Also, comments that most of your answers really helped doctors for to take an informed decision. I don't see any more questions, ma'am. So thank you very much for the presentation and question and answer session. And
Thank you,
it was
Dr. Prachi.
yeah, and it was nice having you, and thank you very much for accepting our
Yeah, it was good
invitation.
interacting
Hmm.
and giving the, discussing these things with the people, in particularly in this month of PCOS awareness month. So that was great.
Okay, but one last question, ma'am, if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
no, no, sure.
Okay, okay. So the question is from Dr. Daisy. The question is, what should be done about the weight reduction? I mean, of course, the lifestyle management would be the answer, but again, that's the question.
What
Weight
should be
reduction.
done? This
Yes.
is the $1,000,000 question. What should be done for weight reduction? And that is what we have been discussing since the last couple of
So,
questions. It's just, with some modification, it is basically the same question. Like what should be done means it's very difficult, So most important is, catching hold of these adolescent girls during right at that adolescent age when, lifestyle modifications, and explaining them the importance of lifestyle modifications, so that gradually they don't come to a stage where weight loss becomes a big issue. Because as gradually, because most important thing in weight reduction is lifestyle modification, truly speaking.
yes.
There are so many marketed magic weight reduction pills, but truly speaking, none of the pills work. And whenever they give pills, they ask the people to spend lots on these pills and then again do lifestyle modification. So basically it is a lifestyle modification which is helping them in reducing the weight, and not those pills. So definitely the patient, if the patient is obese, definitely I would say, and the patient is PCOS and obese, either myo-inositol or taking of metformin will help in reducing the insulin levels, which will gradually help them in reducing the weight. If they do a proper lifestyle modification, then it will help them drastically in reducing the weight. But it is not any tablet or medication which is going to help them in reducing the weight. And in very morbid obese patients, there are surgeries like bariatric can be
Yes,
considered,
yes,
but
yes.
otherwise it is lifestyle modification.
Right, ma'am. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, ma'am. Nice
Thank you.
interaction and nice presentation too. Thank you.
Thank you.